Through the span of history, there have been many forms of government that have led us to where we are now. Before feudalism came into play, people would barter. This means that they would trade goods or services in exchange for other goods and services, with money not being the middleman. This system was working during the time of the Roman Empire because poor people were protected by the soldiers of the emperor. But after the fall of the Roman Empire, there was no law protecting them, so they turned to the kings to act on their behalf. The feudal system was not only in Europe, it was also a form of government in Japan, India, and many other places of the world. But what exactly is feudalism? To find the answer to this question, we turn to the World Atlas, which defines feudalism as a combination of military and legal customs based on the right of holding land in exchange for labor. When the Roman Empire fell, chaos erupted between kingdoms, and at that time, feudalism was established to bring order and to set rules. The feudal system became similar to a pyramid, pictured here, where there were different groups with different degrees of power and status. This is a simplified version of the complicated relationships and chains of command in medieval Europe, but it is largely accurate, especially in the times known as the High Middle Ages, about 1000 to 1300 AD, and the Late Middle Ages, 1300 to 1450. The Pope was the leader of the Church and had come to have a power over the deposing and instating of kings after the crowning of Charlemagne as Holy Roman Emperor. He made it the responsibility of kings to support Christianity among their own people and to spread it to any that lived in lands that they may conquer. The king in turn gave the lords land and had the military might to forcibly depose them. Both the king and lords commanded their own armies and armored warriors, called knights. The serfs were at the bottom of this chain, having to work on lords' estates for protection. The Magna Carta, or Great Charter, created in 1215, was the result of the common folk and nobility getting fed up with a social order in which only the king could make important choices. In the feudal society of Western Europe, the nobles, often called lords, bridged the gap between the king and the common people. A lord was either given his land by the king or inherited it from his family. In return, he would give the king money he acquired by taxing the people who lived in his territory, and also furnish him with men to serve in his army. He would keep a retinue of his own knights, and when called upon by the king, would go into battles with these troops. For this reason, lords were also sometimes referred to as king's knights. Some people in modern-day times that have a similar role to lords would be a factory foreman, who oversees the labor of others and passes off the results to his boss, and a governor, who taxes and manages his locality. The common folk of medieval Europe were called the serfs. The lifestyle of a serf is quite difficult to define, as it was largely dependent on the demeanor and policies of both their lord and their king. Some serfs were considered to be free people who happened to work for a lord and live on his land. These serfs were sometimes allowed to own their own homes or businesses. However, many lords were cruel and demeaning, treating the serfs as slaves. Some unfortunate serfs received only food, which they had to grow themselves as a reward for their labors. This was a major contributing factor to the peasant revolts of the 14th century, as well as the fact that the death toll of the Black Death and other similar diseases had taken such a toll that there weren't enough people to work the land and grow food. A common byproduct of feudalism was the economic system that has come to be known to historians as manorialism. Manorialism is a contract between a lord and his serfs, wherein the lord promises protection and the serfs promise to cultivate his land. In some cases, especially in the early Middle Ages, the serfs were the crew that built the lord's castle. Though not ideal for the serfs, this system was a necessity. To put it bluntly, the Middle Ages was basically a series of never-ending wars between rival kingdoms, regions, and religious groups. The conflicts often began locally, and then escalated to enormous proportions. At the time, battles were considered to be honorable, and when the Pope attempted to channel this violence to the benefit of the Church with the Crusades, The violence spread in a unified wave across the entire continent many times. Despite its problems, feudalism is a system that has been established many times and in many parts of the world. The feudalism we have examined so far was established first in France and Germany, from where it was introduced into England, Sicily, and the Holy Land by the Normans. Similar systems were also to be found in Zimbabwe, Italy, and Spain. Pictured here are diagrams of the clearly stratified societies of perhaps two of the most interesting feudal systems to ever arise, those of Japan and India. Both lasted for thousands of years, far beyond the Middle Ages and into the modern age. Japan developed a very similar class system to Western Europe, known to them also as feudalism. Japanese civilization always had an emperor. The emperor resembled what the king was to Europe, but in Japan, the emperor was also a religious leader. In 1936, a civil war broke out, and at that time the emperor sent armies containing soldiers known as samurai to fight the war. When the samurai returned, the emperor gave the leader of the army the title of shogun, which was a lifetime appointment. He did this to protect himself from being overruled as emperor. Shoguns were now in control of smaller pieces of land and made distributions of this land to their loyal vassals. As in Europe, the feudal system in Japan was structured in a pyramid fashion. At the top of this pyramid was the emperor. Although he had little real power, he was the figurehead and religious leader of Japan. The real leader, with all of the military and political powers, was the shogun, who would distribute large tracts of land to the daimyo, considered to be his vassals. The daimyo also controlled the armies that provided military service to the shogun when needed. The armies were made of samurai, nobles whose land was under the authority of the daimyo. A side note about the samurai is that a man born outside the warrior class could become one by killing another existing samurai. The samurai also had the right to kill any member of a lower class who insulted his honor. This right lasted for hundreds of years, only being revoked in the late 1800s. The next highest ranking tier of the feudal system was constructed of the lower class and majority of the population, called the peasants. They were fishermen and farmers who paid taxes. Below them came artisans, who worked with wood and metal, followed by merchants and servants, who made their living off buying and selling other people's goods. Feudalism in India divides society into 5 main tiers separated by their supposed purity of creation by the god Brahma, their work, and their life. The highest tier was that of the Brahmin, the priests who spread religious learning. They were believed to have been born from the breath of Brahma. Below them were the Kshatriya, the warrior class whose duty it was to protect the people in wartime and to rule with a fair grace during peacetime. Because of all the hard work and strength both of these tasks involved, the Kshatriya were considered born from Brahma's arms. Vaisya, considered to come from Brahma's thighs, fueled the economy through their trades and money lending. Considered to come from Brahma's feet, the Shudra were expected to uphold society by doing such unskilled labor as farm work, or servantry to the upper class. The lowest class in India's feudal system were not even said to be part of a caste. They were declared to be untouchable. They had to do all of the dirty jobs such as trash removal, or dealing with dead bodies, and they were to have no interaction with anyone other than another untouchable. There were various dietary restrictions in place in this society. The upper caste, the Brahmins, were forbidden to eat meat, for example, because of their much higher spiritual purity. India has retained its caste system to the modern day, though with a few modifications over the centuries. Though India's feudal system has come a long way from the brutal relationships between the Brahmins, the embodiment of purity, and the untouchables, the embodiment of pollution, and has laws put in place to deter discrimination and hate crimes, the treatment is to this day cruel. While the ancient caste system basically guaranteed the success of India as a nation by continuing the same patterns of behavior, generation after generation, and the political stability of having a system linked so closely to religious beliefs that it cannot be changed, It could certainly be said that considering the modern tendency towards technological advancement rather than religion, this system may no longer be a viable means to that end. For instance, the caste system is hereditary, meaning that nobody can ever hope to advance to a higher caste. This puts a major impediment in the country being able to progress at a similar pace to Western society. During medieval times, feudalism was the known form of government. It brought structure during a time of pure chaos. Its social hierarchy determined the status of power that was given to each group. Feudalism was not only practiced in Europe, but also in Japan, India, and all around the world. Almost exactly mirroring Europe, Japan and India each had a four-tiered social structure and served almost an identical purpose. The reason for this parallel evolution? Though it seems misplaced in modern-day society, during the Middle Ages, feudalism, despite its many flaws, worked quite well, creating order and control amongst the people under the system.